So, greetings, friends and followers. This is Nurses Talking. I am Dale Barzy. As always, if you like what you see and hear, subscribe. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think. Here on Nurses Talking, we speak to nurses anywhere in the world, at any stage in their nursing journey, from students to retirees and anywhere in between. Today, it is my great pleasure to welcome Barbara Childs. Barbara is a retired RN who currently functions as a certified life and weight loss coach. She was professionally trained through the Life Coach School, and she provides coaching to first responders and nurses experiencing overwhelm. She's also a certified ADHD Clinical Services Provider, coaching adults with ADHD. During her 25 years working as a nurse, she has worked in such areas as pediatrics, critical care, case management, and quality assurance. She's also an author, and she wrote her first book, Life Unpacked, 2 years ago. And Barbara says that she retired 2 months, just 2 months before COVID hit. So welcome, Barbara.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. I'm glad to have you. But I'm always curious as to why people are nurses. So why are you a nurse?
Well, I guess the first time I heard of nursing was junior in high school. I went to high school at Frankfurt American High School because my dad was consulate and American Embassy and all that. And I was at Frankfurt American High School, and we lived amongst a bunch of military. And the first time I heard of nursing was, why don't you become a flight nurse?
Okay.
My brain said, why would I want to do that? I didn't even know what it was, but I didn't know it. But since I was probably 11, 12, I actually had ADHD.
Okay.
But I functioned well because people with ADHD, if they're really interested in something, they excel. That's why Albert Einstein, he had ADHD. If you're really, really engrossed and interested in something, you excel. So fast forward, I had 4 kids and started school, and I decided to be a nurse. And but I that stemmed from in 1982, I had a little boy, and he was my 4th child. And in 1985, when he was 3 years old, he got acute lymphocytic leukemia. And I had already started proceedings of a divorce. So I was a single mom with 4 children and 1 with cancer. And I was overwhelmed.
I can imagine.
Yeah. And so, but from what I've gone through throughout my life, I handle overwhelm very well. So the reason I became a nurse was because Daniel was, he had such a low white cell count and platelet count. He had to have transfusions of platelets, and he was just his immune system was just wiped out. They wanted him on the bone marrow transplant unit, which he didn't need a bone marrow ever, but he was so immune suppressed that that's the only critical care ICU at UCLA. We were at UCLA, so we were on that unit, and the nurses were from the bone marrow transplant unit that took care of him. And about 4 months into his chemotherapy, he got a heavy dose of Cytoxin. And I don't know if you know what that is, but Cytoxin will wipe a 3-year-old out, you know. So he ended up getting pneumocystis pneumonia and nearly died. His white count was 300.
Wow.
We lived in Las Vegas, so I went into he was breathing really fast, you know, and I took him to the doctor. And this is part of my coaching too. Speak up when things are wrong. Speak up, right?
Yeah.
I took him to the doctor, and his doctor happened to be at UCLA when Daniel was there, but she graduated from her residency, and she's opened up her own practice in Vegas. So she became his doctor. But her partner was an older guy. And I called the office and I said, Daniel's breathing really fast. He's got a temperature of 104.5. And I'm really worried about it. And I wasn't a nurse at the time. I said, I'm really worried about him because he doesn't look good. He said, oh, bring him in. We'll look at him. So I rushed down there and brought him in, and they were closed from 12 to 1 for lunch. And I got there at 10 minutes to 1. And I saw the nurses, everybody got off the elevator right in front of me, didn't even acknowledge me. And I said, are you going to let me come in and just lay him down somewhere? And they said, oh, well, we have 10 minutes left on our lunch. That was the wrong thing to say to me. Got up and I left. In Vegas, we had a excellent support group called Candlelighters for childhood cancer. And what we did, and I became the president later on, but what we did is if a parent needed a hotel, airline ticket, anything, they would get it for us at a moment's notice and meet us at the airport with a ticket and everything. Money to eat cafeteria food. We never had to worry about anything. They would cover our house payment if we were in crisis, electric bill, everything. Look, the doctor's office called me back and they said, why did you leave? And I said, you're not going to tell me that when my child is so critically ill that he's going to wait out in the hallway and then just ignore me when you finally let us in. I said, we're at the airport ready, flying out to UCLA. So we flew out there and they immediately put him on the unit, and he had to be put in a tent.
Yeah.
And his face was like blue and purple, and he was breathing 93 respirations a minute. Yeah, he's 3 years old, and I was just freaking out, and so they had to intubate him. And turns out he had the pneumocystis pneumonia. The doctor kept telling me, the oncologist, he kept telling me he's not going to make it. He's just not going to make it. I'm telling you this because, Barbara, I don't want you to have false hope. And I said, no, you're not going to tell me that. I said, I'm all he's got. If I don't have hope, he's got nothing, right? So after a couple of weeks, and his white count was 300. And they just didn't see it coming up. And one morning I was laying on the bed, and he always sucked his knuckle. And he reached his hand trying to reach his knuckle in his mouth. And I'm like, he's back. I mean, tears rolled down my face. And, they called the doctor came in and they were so excited, they called for an emergency extubation. Got spinal meningitis the next year, which turns out it was actually polio because he was around some kid that had a live vaccine, and he hadn't had a chance to have his polio vaccination. So he had polio, and he almost had to go on a respirator again. We were in a room once again at UCLA, and let me tell you about anxiety. You leave after an experience at a hospital with your child, like I did when he was on a vent for 6 weeks. And then a year later, you go back and you're going up the elevator. Literally, my feet were glued to the elevator floor. I could not step off the elevator onto that pediatric floor. I couldn't.
Wow.
It was like I was cemented. I was like, you're not going in there, that good things don't happen in there, so
yeah.
But I gathered myself together and went there and they put him in the ICU there, and they didn't have to intubate him.
Okay.
Which was a blessing. Anyway, that's how I became a nurse. I became a nurse because of Daniel, and watching the bone marrow transplant unit nurses and how good they were with parents and the children, and they, they would sit there and Daniel would be hitting crackers, and they'd be going all over the room and they'd come over and hit the crackers with him. And I mean, it made my heart swell knowing that he's in such good care, So I wanted to emulate those nurses. I've always lived my life to have a plan B. Plan A doesn't always fall.
Yeah, I know.
You gotta have a plan B because and that's why I became a life coach after I've heard so many nurses complain about what unit they're in. I'm in med surg, I hate it, blah, blah, blah. Move around. There's so many things you can do. You can't.
Yeah, nursing is huge.
You can't stay static, there's legal nurse consulting. I was one of those too, I mean, I was raised as a daughter of, like I said, a diplomat at the State Department. And we were evacuated from the Arab-Israeli War in 1967. So at the age of 11, I was faced with an evacuation out of a war. I learned a lot from that. I learned compassion. I learned how to, how horrible things can be for people,
Yeah.
and there's nothing they can do about it. And I feel so bad for them. I'm a total empath. It's ridiculous. I can watch a commercial and cry, but I learned so much from that. And we took in refugees and helped people who wanted to escape from the protests and riots. Of course, we had to leave for 6 weeks. We went to Istanbul, but my father always taught me that, well, the one thing he put in our heads as his kids is don't ever forget whose last name you have. That's a very important thing to tell your children.
Indeed.
And so I've always had that in the back of my head. If I wanted to do something that might have been not the best decision, what would he say? No, he wouldn't be happy. So, but that made me a better person. But yeah, I love nursing. I love that I can carry it over into life coaching. I also include anti-aging. I have the weight loss program that I have, which, it's not telling people, you can only eat this and that and this and that. No, people decide what they want to eat. But the trick is, you have a timeline thing or a line.
Yeah.
And
it's a continuum.
And zero to positive 10. If you're at -2, you're hungry. You eat, you're at 2, and then you're done. You don't go past that, Yeah. And there's a thing that the Japanese have that I also incorporate in my coaching is ikigai. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah.
And they say only eat 80% of your meal and you're done.
And you're done.
And they're thin, But I also coach on relationships, family relationships. I show people how they can solve any problem with this model right here, which is, their circumstance. What's the thought that's causing that? The circumstance is a T.
Okay.
What feelings are you feeling with that thought? What's that, feelings is that thought causing, and then tell me what actions you're taking because of that.
Yeah.
Tell me what actions you're not taking.
Okay.
And then for both of those, taking or not taking, tell me the results you get for both.
Yeah.
And people can work out, oh, I didn't realize that, So great model that I use. So
yeah, I can see why it would be. Yeah.
So I love coaching. I love nursing.
You retired just before COVID.
2 months.
2 months before COVID. My goodness. Was it you retired and then the pandemic hit? So what kind of challenges did that present a challenge for you? Did you feel, because I also had not been working. I had retired just before, maybe about 6 months before that. And I had spent my most of my winter out of the country. I spent most of my winter in the Caribbean, and then COVID hit, and I came back, and I felt um initially I was like, oh wow, I didn't actually really think it was going to go on for as long as it was. And then as things it went on and things got bigger and bigger and bigger, and I started to feel, well, I can't just sit here. I've got to go back. Did you ever have that?
I did not, because I live in Florida and we have a governor that opened everything up right away, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that wasn't bad, at all. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I can remember watching the news and watching all those nurses in New York and New Jersey, and oh, my heart just broke.
Mm-hmm.
And they were
Mm-hmm.
so exhausted, and they kept saying, well, you can make a lot of money if you come to New York. And I'm like, you know,
Nah.
we'll let the younger nurses do that.
I gotcha.
But yeah, I also had a couple years at teaching nursing at Nightingale College in Utah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And I taught in with the um, I didn't do the courses. I did the
Oh, you did clinical, yeah.
clinical, and that was interesting. I really enjoyed those students. They
Mhm.
loved what they were doing. They loved the nurses. Of course, they fell right into the COVID when they graduated.
Yes. That was difficult for them.
It
It
was.
was
And I kept in touch with them, and they've learned a lot. And the one thing they kept always asking me, because I had such a good instructor that taught us how to document, right? Well, nurses today are not being taught that. If I could give a tip to any of the nurses that are precepting a student, first, be kind, don't eat your young. And secondly, show them what needs to be in documentation. When I did case management for workers' comp, and that was my last position before COVID. And I don't know, that it seemed like the management was so concerned with the insurance companies, and not with what was right.
Yeah. Mhm.
So, and because I told you I'm a right, do truth
Mhm.
right, and speak up if you see something wrong. So I had a patient with a head injury. He got hit in the head on he was doing something on a golf course, and he got hit in the head with a ball, and it knocked him off the golf cart, and he ended up with a severe concussion. And by the time I got him, he'd been out of the hospital a few weeks, but he was still having vision that would go in and out. He clearly still had a concussion. And the neurologist says, well, he's doing okay, he's doing all right, so I'm going to go ahead and write a note that he can start working again and driving and all that stuff. And I have a problem with my mouth. I said, really? And he goes, yeah, he's fine. I says, not while my family's on the road. He's not.
Mhm.
I don't want him on that road if my family or I am on that road, or anyone I know or love. He's not ready. Well, I got back to my supervisor and I got in so much trouble. But she said,
That's what it is.
don't you feel like you did something wrong? And I said, no. When you get over 60, you get really bold.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean about that. So I have two questions for you. One is, what would you say though, having you've observed nurses, both you've been a nurse, you've observed nurses. What would you say is the most essential quality? If you could say in just one word, what is the most essential quality of a nurse? What would that word be?
I think the most essential quality of a nurse is to be a team player.
Okay.
Don't badmouth any of the nurses you're working with.
Mhm.
Don't say something, because there are some people that like to cause shame in people, right?
Yeah.
So don't make someone feel shameful. Don't say anything that's going to make them feel shameful. Or, I would say most nurses, I would say 95% of all nurses are angels. I think one thing nurses should have in a hospital, maybe even other settings, there should be a life coach on board in management to help people get through this stuff.
That would be an awesome thing, actually. That
Because
would be an awesome thing.
a therapist and a life coach is a therapist helps you figure out your past. You can't fix the past. Past is done.
Hmm.
Life coaches move you forward. It's future thinking, push
Yeah.
yourself forward. That's the difference between therapy and coaches. So I highly recommend people find a life coach they really like and stick with them. And
Yeah. Yeah. I have a question. What do you do for self-care? You've
so
given so much.
I I I am a doTERRA essential oil guru thing. I'm certified in essential oils as a clinical
Mhm.
expert in essential oils.
Yeah.
So I do a lot of my essential oils. I do a lot of research, like I felt like after I got the, I don't know if it was a vaccine or COVID, but my brain was messed up. I couldn't smell things. When people would look at me and you
Yeah.
talk, I would hear you behind me. I was like,
Mhm.
whoa, what's going on here? So anyway, there's a Japanese herb called nattokinase.
Mm.
Helps dissolve some of those spikes left over in your body. And so I started taking that. So I do a lot of research. And of course, I've got my 3 little puppies, my dachshunds. I don't work out a lot.
Okay.
I've never been a big worker outer. But now I'm starting to feel some arthritis going on. So
Mhm.
I decided I need to at least do yoga.
Okay.
To me, running, a fun run to me is an oxymoron. But I just enjoy my family and I love traveling. Before I met my husband, I did crazy stuff like I volunteered and went to Bosnia. Um,
Okay.
APHIS has, the Army and Air Force and Navy, they all have these military stores.
Yeah.
And I was in Germany working, and I was an exchange detective. So I got to go around watching people, stealing. I'd bust them and yeah, some master sergeant stole a box of chocolates on Valentine's Day to give to his wife, and I busted him, and he lost 2 stripes. He's no longer a master sergeant. That's one of those things. Use your head.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but the one that really touched me the most was I busted this little boy. He was probably 8 or 9. He had a bunch of Pokemon cards that he had stolen, and so I busted him and pulled him back into the office, and his parents were there, and he was crying, and they were really upset with him, and I said, I'm sorry, but it's good he learns now instead of later, right? So it wasn't but 2 or 3 weeks later, I got a letter from the kid saying that he's sorry, and that he's sorry he took up my time, but he learned a really good lesson, and thank you for being so kind to him.
Ah,
So I've still got that letter. And that was like 26 years ago, you know? So, but yeah, I went to Bosnia and I spent 3 months there. It was freezing cold, middle of winter. I like experiences. I like traveling. I
mhm.
like taking chances.
Yeah,
I put it all in my book. That's why
yeah,
I wrote my book, because I wanted to leave a legacy for my children and my grandchildren. I
yeah.
didn't care if it made a lot of money, and it didn't, you know. I didn't do any marketing for it or anything, but I wanted them to know what their grandfather did.
Barbara, it has been a delight talking to you,
Oh,
really.
thank
You
you.
have been so full of experiences and so free with your thoughts and your experiences and what they have meant. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I probably talk too much because I never talk to anybody.
Don't worry. That's why we're talking. We talk because, I like talking to nurses. There are so many things that nurses have
Right,
to share.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So thank you so much.
You have a good day.
And you too, Barbara.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.